Well, we're coming into the last week of September. It's a lovely, pleasant day here as the dog seems to be enjoying herself. Pretty lively, not quite sure what she's looking for. But I don't think it's going to be about today's subject, which is all about weeds. So today we're going to be talking about weeds, and sure, James is going to be a little bit more in depth in his particular video about them, or the two videos that he's done. But primarily, most of us look at the idea of weeds and we define them as being a plant in the wrong place. But here's the thing, it's a plant and it has an importance, whether it's good for us or bad for us. So we'll flick over to James now, let him go through all the points about them. But at the end of the day, a weed is a plant. And as we've discussed in other videos, plants are important for us all. And we need them in the ground for as long as we can possibly do that. Now I'm going to head out into the garden and we're going to start looking at all the things that we've got here and how relevant it is to what James is going to discuss now, but also how I'm twisting it around into my own favour and how you can perhaps do the same. So let's go and look at James first, and I'll catch up with you in the garden in a second.
Hello and welcome to the world of weeds. Weeds are plants that grow where they're not wanted or needed. We want to understand that some can be beneficial, but others could be harmful. Some weeds are also edible and can be used as food or medicine. The first one is dandelion. This is a common weed with yellow flowers and toothed leaves. It is edible and nutritious, being rich in vitamins A, C, and K. You can eat the leaves too, either raw or cooked. Dandelion is also used as a herbal remedy for various ailments, such as liver problems, kidney stones, skin conditions, and digestive disorders. Here is another one for you, the stinging nettle. This is a weed with stinging hairs on its stems and leaves. It can cause skin irritation and inflammation if touched. But it is also edible and medicinal if cooked or processed properly. You can boil or steam the young shoots and leaves, or dry them for tea. Stinging nettles are high in protein, iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamin C. In at number 3 is purslane. We have a lot of this growing here at Regen. It is a low-growing weed with succulent stems and leaves. It often grows in moist and sunny areas of gardens and landscapes. It is edible and some say delicious, with a crunchy texture and a lemony flavor. Purslane is rich in omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, vitamin A, vitamin C, and also minerals like magnesium and potassium. It has heart-shaped leaves and white flowers that smell like garlic. It can also crowd out native plants and reduce biodiversity. However, it is also edible and flavorful, with a spicy taste of garlic and mustard. You can eat the roots and young leaves raw or cooked, in salads, pestos, sauces, or soups. Garlic mustard is rich in vitamin C and has antibacterial properties. It is also used to treat asthma, blood disorders, and wounds. These are just some of the many edible weeds that you may find in your garden. Now Simon is in the garden looking at some of the weeds we have, and he has some interesting ideas on how we value and use ours.
Now, in a previous video, we spoke about me having living pathways here. Now, some people choose to have their pathways between their beds and define them using wood chip. And the idea of that is that it suppresses weed growth. But as I've just mentioned, weeds are a plant. And by having a living pathway between these beds, I'm still feeding the soil, which is an important part of our theory about regen. Now, I take the principle even further and we come into our actual beds themselves. Now I've got some small growing weeds here, and there's an element of purslane in here, and I've got some dandelions as well, but I've cleared the remains of what I had, which was bindweed, and I've still got a little bit here. I've also got a bit of a breeze flowing across, but it's very easy to pull this out. So I don't want the bindweed because it just takes over and it strangles the plant, and then in a minute James is going to go further into that, which is what and why we don't want it. But remember, this is a no dig bed, and I'm keeping what weeds I have got that I consider to be a benefit in the soil, because as they continue to grow, they're trading their nutrients with the bacteria below the soil, helping to keep my soil healthy. So I don't necessarily want to remove these at the moment. Now, we can sow a cover crop in here to do the same thing, and we'll come on to that in the next video. As cover crops, as the name suggests, is there to cover the soil so we don't lose it through erosion, and also feed it at the same time. This is another bed that we've recently cleared. This is where we had the cauliflower. But if you look, there are very few weeds here. The cauliflowers were quite big, and so the leaves of the plant suppress the weed growth by cutting out the light. And so I would want to cover crop this with something, and I will sow this with a quick growing mustard to keep the soil covered. But I've also got another cover. I'm not sure if it's exactly welcome, but we've got Jack covering the ground, and he's staring down that mole hole or mouse hole who've been in, as we know, with the carrots. He's not fussed, is he, really? So this is the bed where we had the honeydew melons. I've still got a couple there that need to ripen, and there's a couple of butternut squashes in there. But if you look at the actual plants themselves, they've covered the ground quite well, and there's very little weed growth in this particular section of the bed. But as you come down towards where we had the kohlrabies, we begin to see some bindweed creeping in, and mainly that's all there is. There's a bit of grass there somehow, and a little bit of purslane. When we harvest these kohlrabies, we'll expose what other weeds there could be underneath. So some I will keep, some obviously I don't want. For example, that bindweed. Now, this cabbage. Why am I showing you that? It's not a weed. Quite right. But just to give you an idea of the soil health, I cut one of his cousins about 3 weeks ago, but I left the root of the cabbage plant in the ground, and it started to regrow. And a couple of weeks after doing that, I did it again with another one. And so this one here has continued to grow. And if we look, we've got some babies coming out from the main stem. So I harvested the cabbage but left the root in the ground, and now I've got 4 or 5, but they look like really big Brussels sprouts. And with the same family, I guess, so why not? So I'm not going to take that out, because it just showing that the plant's roots are still interacting with the soil below, and they're trading off each other and feeding each other. So I'm not so keen to remove every single plant and its roots from my beds. This thistle is a great example. It's growing, and it seems to be growing quite well. So it's trading with its roots, as we've said, coming all the way up to the top. Now, the trick with that is that whilst it's still able to grow before the cold season comes and kills it off, I want to keep it trading, but I don't want it to set any more seeds. So all we do is pick off the flower heads, and that'll carry on growing just like that cabbage. Time is right, I can remove the plant, put it onto the compost heap for it to release the nutrients it's pulled up from the soil, so there's absolutely no wastage whatsoever.
So as we have just seen from our space here, we are not weed free. So it is important for us to identify the good guys from the bad guys. Here are some common examples of the bad guys we need to be aware of. Crabgrass. This is an invasive weed that looks similar to grass, but has coarse texture, thick blades, and lateral growth. It can crowd out and smother your lawn grass as it takes over. It also produces up to 150,000 seeds per plant, which can germinate the next year and cause more problems. Crabgrass can be prevented by being pulled out by hand. Japanese knotweed is a noxious weed that spreads quickly by seeds, runners, and rhizomes. It has thick, hollow, red stems that resemble bamboo, and shovel-shaped dark green leaves. It grows in thick clusters and can stand up to 15 feet tall. And that then leads to displacing native plants and altering ecosystems. Japanese knotweed is very hard to eradicate, and often requires professional help to remove it. Giant ragweed. This is a tall weed that grows up to 12 feet, blocking sunlight from other plants. It has large lobed leaves and clusters of small creamy white flowers. Giant ragweed is a major allergen, causing hay fever and asthma in many people. It can be controlled by mowing or cutting before it flowers. Dog strangling vine is an invasive weed and forms a dense mat of twining stems and leaves. It has small pink or purple flowers and long seed pods that release fluffy seeds. Dog strangling vine can choke out other plants, reduce biodiversity, and interfere with forest regeneration. There are many others that fall into this category. We have only listed some. Luckily, we are only really dealing with bindweed here. So let's take a closer look at that, as it's one of the most common weeds many gardeners and growers have to deal with. Bindweed is a common name for several species of plants that belong to the family Convolvulaceae. They are vines that can grow up to several meters long, and have white or pink flowers that resemble those of morning glories. It can be a nuisance in gardens and farms, because they can wrap around and smother other plants, and have deep and extensive root systems that are hard to remove. Bindweed can be controlled by various methods, depending on the type and extent of the infestation. Some of the possible ways to deal with bindweed are pulling or digging out the roots by hand, making sure to remove as much of the underground stems and rhizomes as possible. But because of the principles we follow by using the no-dig method and smothering with cardboard, we have seen a big reduction in its growth. Mowing or cutting the stems before they flower, to prevent seed production and reduce photosynthesis. This can weaken the plant over time, but may not be enough to kill it completely. Planting competitive crops or plants that can outgrow and shade out the bindweed, such as alfalfa, clover, grasses, or shrubs. This can reduce the bindweed's vigor and spread, but may not eliminate it completely. Now, before we head back to Simon, remember that to join us here, simply click our logo. Bottom right corner of your screen. Thanks.
In the celeriac bed. I just said that wrong. And if we look carefully here, there's very little bindweed. But down here, we have a thistle. It looking pretty healthy in its growth. You're probably going to think this is really strange, me saying this weed is a healthy grower, and that I'm keen to have it. So I'm keen, looking at this bed here, to keep the bindweed to a minimum, because I don't want it strangling the plants and suffocating them from light. But things like the thistle, it's not going to cause me any issues as long as I make sure that I remove the flower heads before they turn to seed, and then when I do take the plants out, it can go onto the compost as we've already discussed and seen. Now we're going to walk down this section of living pathway, and there's all kinds of things in here. We've got the grass, we've got the thistles, we've got some daisies, or some might think chamomile. And then we're looking across here, so there's the parsnips that are doing very nice, and also the beetroots that I'm leaving in the ground. And then across to this side, you may recall I planted some peas, or sowed some peas. Here we go. There's another thistle there that's quite large. We'll just pick out that. There is some bindweed in here, which I will want to get out. But overall, I'm leaving this. There's a dandelion there, which is a good thing. Another thistle there that I need to just take the top out. But overall, not bad. And I keep looking through this because sometimes you might get a rogue weed, as I call it. I just want this all to die down and fix the nitrogen on this particular bed here with the peas. But if I see a weed that I know is dangerous, I'll get in there and take him out. It's a lovely day. This wasn't like this this time last year. And as I'm looking around at the vegetables that I've got left to harvest, they will naturally weed themselves as I harvest out the plants. Like the squashes, for example, and get those leaves from those onto the compost heap. But generally speaking, I'm not adverse to having weeds in the garden because I can actually see the benefits. And the thing is that if I'm not spending a lot of time weeding because I want the benefits of the actual plant themselves to help my other plants in my soil, I'm saving myself a lot of time. So I hope that you are now beginning to look at weeds in a different way. Remember, it's a plant, potentially in the wrong place, but it's still a plant. It still has its roots and it's still interacting with our soil promoting more soil health, which in turn gives us healthier plants. Maybe by looking at weeds in a different way and stop thinking of them as being a negative impact on our environment and a positive one. Okay, James has explained there are some bad guys out there and we really don't want to incorporate them into our growing spaces. But I can use a lot of these weeds on my margins and edges and increase my biodiversity with very little effort by incorporating their benefits of being there for the pollinators and the other wildlife. Because as those areas die down, they'll give me a habitat for all the beneficial insects to overwinter. So really the question is, are they a good thing or are they a bad thing? Overall, I would say they're a good thing. It's about 75%. The other 25%, as we've seen, can be pretty dangerous for us. Say dangerous, perhaps I mean harmful. We haven't covered all of them. There's lots out there, and I'm sure there'll be others in your own particular climate that pose more of a threat to you than they do to me here. But they have their place in our growing spaces. And if we take the weeds out of the ground and we put them on our compost heap, there's another benefit. But because they draw out all the nutrients, comfrey is a fantastic example about how far down the roots go and transfer all that goodness into its leaves. We can take those and steep them in water and make our own liquid feeds, which we can then give back to our growing plants the following season. So tradition has had us believe that weeds are bad. Science, on the other hand, is now beginning to show us that they can actually be quite good and certainly beneficial. But I think for centuries, a lot of people have recognised the power of weeds and how they can help us in the medicinal world. So for sure, for me, the weeds are an important part of our growing experience, certainly under the Regen banner. And that's why you'll look around when I do my tours of the patches and you'll see certain things are growing in certain places that you may not necessarily think is a good thing to do, or you might just think I'm a scruffy individual. But it's there for a reason. And sometimes another reason could be because I just missed it. But they're there and they're doing a job. And that is all part of what we're trying to do. Now I'm already looking at the content of the next video, which is all about cover cropping, because it is related to weeds and why I'm leaving some weeds in my beds at the moment. The main principle being is that if I'm without a cover crop, I've still got one if I've got weeds growing in that particular bed, as long as it's not a weed that I don't want. Does that make sense? So I am also looking at creating some more beds, no dig. I've had a large delivery of horse manure that needs to also be processed, incorporated into the compost bins to rot down over the winter, and some to lay on that new section of new beds, and also some to redress the compost that's been depleted over this growing season. That may well help with those current weeds in the ground to continue growing throughout that period of time. But the principle is weeds can help with cover crops to keep the soil covered and then in good health. As we've already said, if you want to keep learning more, click the logo on the right hand corner of the screen. The dog's coming back to make sure you've done that. Or for more daily updates on what's going on, you can find me on the various social media channels that I'm on, and I'll put the links in the description below. So for now, I'm going to crack on and get my jobs done for the day, and I'll catch up with you very soon. I wonder if the cat is still lying on that vegetable patch.